Ladies and gents, for those who are not familiar with Paul du Toit, he was the first African this century to be awarded the CSP, or Certified Speaking Professional designation. For over 2 decades, he's coached others to use their vocal cords to get their points across persuasively. But really impressively, in the last 5 years, his colleagues in the PSASA inducted him into the SA Speakers Hall of Fame. For fun, he does have time for fun. He scuba dives, he runs ultra marathons, Paul, really. He picks at his nylon string guitar and sips Cabernet Sauvignon with well-matured cheddar. Please join me in welcoming Paul du Toit.
Thank you very much. Please send that to me because I'd like to use it again. That was pretty good. She spends 10 hours a day writing and teaching others to write. She was South Africa's Freelance Copywriter of the Year in 2020 and one of the world's top 50 female content marketers in 2021. She's also a trainer and speaker who's worked all over the world, coming face to face with, excuse me, messaging that ranges from the sublime to the absurd. She likes her coffee strong and black, her paragraphing short and tight, and her apostrophes in all the right places. You could say she has a way with words. Please meet Tiffany Markman.
Thank you. I love that. A way with words. I might borrow that. Paul, do you expect a royalty?
Indeed.
Oh,
I can offset it against some writing. How's that?
Nice. Deal, deal, deal. Okay, good. So will you warm us up?
Yeah, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about how writing a speech and delivering a speech kind of merge together. And the bit in the middle really is preparation, but the writing is part of the preparation. There is, of course, a missing bit, and the missing bit that affects delivery is really the prep part and how to arrange that. One of the biggest problems that speakers have is they spend too much time on content and too little time on delivery. And it doesn't mean that they spend enough time writing their speech properly. They're just too busy with slides and all sorts of other superfluous things which don't help them to get that message across. And this is really where we're wanting to put the two bits together and show you how important it is to get the writing right, to get the delivery right, and to make sure that your preparation time in the middle is what it should be.
So one of the important things I think about speaking is that if you're already a writer like I am, but not a stage speaker like Paul is, then there's a huge amount of anxiety. And if you are not a writer like me, but rather a performer like Paul, then there's a huge amount of writing anxiety. And so whichever kind of anxiety you are feeling at the moment or think you might feel in future or have felt in the past, what we are hoping to do is use a couple of tricks to help you to mitigate those anxieties. But Paul, I wonder if you'll talk to us a little bit about negative self-talk.
Okay, so we're going to be touching on anxiety a little bit later on because it's a key factor in putting together a speech and delivering that speech. In fact, there are various factors in which we experience anxiety. But one of the most common that I find is the way people talk to themselves about their own ability to deliver a speech. So they'll typically say, well, I'm not really good at speaking in front of an audience. That's the typical one. Or I'm not good at doing presentations, or I always mess up and what have you. Now, in order to clarify this, I'd like to just give you a quick metaphor. And you heard earlier on that I'm a marathon runner, but forget about marathons. Let's just say you're running a 10-kilometer, which is long enough. So you're standing at the starter's line, and you manage to get your hand on a gun, and you take the gun and you point it at your right foot and you just about blast your foot off. Now, I think it's pretty logical that having shot yourself in the foot, you're not going to be running 10 kilometers today, and you might not ever run 10 kilometers ever again. So what I want to ask you is, why do we psychologically shoot ourselves in the foot before we've even been given an assignment? In other words, by labeling ourselves in our own inner minds as a poor speaker, you're already almost trying to run the race with your leg tied behind your back. And this is what I'd like to start focusing on, because if we can get beyond the anxiety bit and focus on some of the technical things that are going to make you a better speaker, you'll find that just by applying, let's say, 1 or 2 of the 6 tips you're going to get here today, it's automatically going to make you a better speaker. But now, Tiffany, writing anxiety you speak about the two different voices. And I think this ties in quite nicely with what I've just spoken about.
Yes, so one of the things that I see in my writing career very, very often, and it's very true of speaking as well, is that when you give somebody a task to write something, they tend to adopt a very funny voice in their writing that is not their actual voice. So for example, let's say, Paul, that I am not a confident writer and I have to write you an email complaining about your shirt. If I were to pick up the phone and complain about your shirt, I would use my own natural speaking rhythms and word choices and my own voice and my own intonations and inflections. And so the complaint would sound very much like me because it would be me talking. But if I were typing an email to you to complain about your shirt, what I would do if I didn't know this, and what most people do, is I'd put on a different writing voice, a slightly more formal, slightly more legal, more distanced, less engaged, more remote, more robotic voice. And that's what we do. We write and speak in different voices. Now, that was okay a million years ago when we communicated via letter. But now that email is in our first square meter of personal space, and that's the main means of communication, also now that we communicate via our phones, we need to try and learn to speak and write in the same voice. In other words, to write as we speak, rather than to speak as we write. And so I feel that one of the ways to overcome some of that anxiety, particularly linked to the writing part, is take the pressure away from you to write proper and rather write like yourself, because it'll sound nicer, it'll be easier for you to say, it'll read better, and it will be more authentic. So you won't create this artificial distance between yourself and the listener, in this case, or the reader.
So can I just ask you, I find this quite interesting because, for instance, if you were needing to send somebody an email, and let's say it's something that you want to complain about something, is it then a better idea to pen the email, go and make yourself a cup of coffee, go and do something, come back and reread the email as if you're the person receiving the email? Would you advocate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we call proofing with a cold eye. And we do it all the time. We do it with sensitive emails, but you should definitely do it with speeches. Yes. And any strategic or important document, it needs to be left cold. So I say to my students, if you can write something really important and then read it the next morning, that's first prize. But in reality, we don't have those sort of lead times. So the next best thing you can do is just get away from it. Have a cup of tea, go to the bathroom, just stand up and, I don't know, walk around the room, whatever the thing is, go to a school lift, but just get your eyes cold again. And then not only will you see your own errors, which you wouldn't have seen otherwise, but you also will be able to read the tone better, and you'll be able to see where the artificial distance is in the words and phrases that you've chosen.
So your writing actually almost looks different to you the next day, or if you give it a few hours to look back at it, and it's about the tonality of the writing, isn't it?
Yes, but also about your own mindset, because if you're quite cross or aggressive when you write something and then you've calmed down overnight, you tend not to want to be as hardcore as you were yesterday. Yeah. But also you see things you didn't see the first time. So again, one of the things I believe in very strongly is what I call, I don't know what the real name is, but I call it neuro autocorrect. So it's where your brain shows you what it wants to see on the page, not what is actually there. So you think you've written public holiday, but you've written pubic holiday, and your brain says, awesome. And you can spot that with a cold eye, but you can't see it with a warm eye.
There's something called writer's block that happens to people, particularly when they write something in a bit of a linear fashion.
Yes.
What do you think about writer's block? Do you believe in it?
I'm so glad you asked me that. No, I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't believe in it. Because very often I get paid by the hour. So I can't afford to get writer's block. Writer's block is not a thing I can afford to believe in.
That's you.
But also I've been writing for 10 hours a day for 17 years. Yeah. So I don't get blocked. But people who do not have that practice of like their 5,000 hours of whatever, sometimes do get blocked. I believe that there are ways around it though. Do you want to hear some of those?
I'd love to.
So if you feel that you have writer's block, which for those of you who've never experienced this, you're very lucky, but also here's what it feels like. So your left brain, your logical brain, is telling you that you have a message to communicate. or an agenda to share or something that needs to go out. And your right brain is panicking because it has to create the creativity and the structure for this message. And the two absolutely can't work at the same time. So they sort of short circuit each other and freak out and nothing happens. And then you stand in front of a blank screen for hours. So what I find works for me when I'm teaching this to students or people who don't produce massive volumes of content is you need to silence one or other side. So you either need to give the left free rein and make a bulleted list if you're a more left brain dominant person, or give the right free rein and doodle or free write or sing a song or something just to sort of calm the brain, the side of the brain down that you want to use at that time. And that tends to work quite well. But also the more writing you do, the less block you get, because you know that block means starving.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're trying to write something, let's say a speech, and you want to start at the beginning and you want to end at the end, what happens is people often get stuck. Most common places at the start. So one of the bits of advice that I've been giving over the years has quite simply been just write down all the ideas that come into your head, and then you can flesh them out. You don't have to start at the beginning. In fact, the beginning is often the worst place to start, and I'll tell you why. Because when you're delivering a speech, generally you're aiming for a central message, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But you then want the audience to do something after you have spoken, apart from saying that was a wonderful speech. And that is all really channeled into your central message. So if you actually start off at the end and say, this is how I'm going to end the speech, then you've almost got goalposts to aim for. And because you should generally be at least somewhat of a topic expert on what you're going to be speaking about, the rest of the content should quite easily fall into place. Wouldn't that perhaps be a way of writing anything?
Yes, it absolutely is. And I learned this from you when I read your book, The Exceptional Speaker. No, it's not called The Exceptional Speaker. It's called, I have it here. Where is it?
You Can Present with Confidence. That one.
That's the one. That's the one. That book taught me that I don't have to start my speech or my story at the beginning. So as a writer, I think in terms of beginning, middle, well, I used to. There we go. Thanks, Paul. Beginning, middle, end. But Paul's book taught me that I can start my speech in the middle of a story, which is much more interesting because the audience has this element of surprise. They don't really know where we're going or what sort of journey I'm taking them on. And then I can wrap it all up neatly as I go. And I didn't know that as a new speaker. And it's something that I've started doing in my writing, and it actually works quite well because it's unexpected. Now, you can only do that if you have control of your narrative. Otherwise, it lands up all over the place.
Yeah.
But I think, Paul, that this is actually a good time for us to sort of segue into the more formal part of our presentation, which is the 6 nuggets that we've promised our audience, the 6 secrets, the 6-pack.
Can I ask you something quickly before we go there? We touched on linear.
Yes.
Just describe to me the difference between linear and non-linear speeches.
Okay. So a linear narrative is one that follows a very obvious trajectory. Beginning, middle, end. So, hello, my name is Paul. I'm here to talk to you about scuba diving. There are 5 things you need to know about scuba diving. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so those were the 5 things. Have a nice day. Goodbye. That's linear. Non-linear is Paul stands up to talk about scuba diving, but actually he talks about not being able to breathe when he was 5 because he was anxious. And he starts in the middle of the story. He then gives us all of his points. And then towards the end, he reminds us of when he was 5, and then he gives us the message at the end. So it's a very sort of, there's a lot of velocity, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of change, and the narrative arc is not solid, it's windy.
Yeah, so you can start in the middle, go to the beginning, go to the end. You don't have to do it beginning, middle, end in that order.